The greatest birthday gift you could give me, Mom, is to disappear from my life. Those were the words my own son hurled at me on his 46th birthday. They sliced through me like a blade, but what made it unbearable was that I had walked into that evening carrying nothing but hope for laughter, for family, for love. I remember so clearly I carried a chocolate cake topped with fresh strawberries ordered from the most famous bakery in town, the very flavor Daniel had adored as a boy. I thought he would smile, maybe hug me like he once did, and that we would sit together as a family sharing memories around the table. I, Rosa Alvarez, 71 years old, after 40 years of long nights as a nurse, believed that all my sacrifices had led to moments like this. As I pulled up to his sprawling mansion, pride swelled in my chest. Marble pillars, glowing windows, golden lights, spilling into the dusk, it all looked like a monument to the life I had worked myself raw to provide. I whispered to myself, tonight he will remember. But when the heavy door opened, my dream shattered. Daniel stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes dull with irritation. "Oh, it's you," he muttered, as though my presence were an obligation he couldn't avoid. No smile, no warmth. My lips trembled, but I held the cake steady and forced a smile. "Happy birthday, my love." He didn't look at it. He didn't look at me. He turned inside and said flatly, "Just come in." Inside, the air smelled of wine and polished wood. Sophia sat on a velvet chair, her sequin dress glittering under the chandelier. The moment she saw me, her lips curved, not with welcome, but with mockery. She leaned back as though my arrival were a stain on her perfect evening. I tried again, setting the cake carefully on the table. "I thought we could share this after dinner," I said softly. "Chocolate with strawberries, just like when Daniel was little." My voice wavered, but I prayed they didn't hear it. Daniel poured himself another drink, not even glancing at the cake. "You shouldn't have," he said, not in gratitude, but with annoyance, as though my effort were a burden. My chest tightened. For a moment I searched his face for the boy who once clung to me after nightmares, who whispered, "Don't leave me, Mom." But all I saw was impatience, an adult man who saw his mother as an intrusion. Then came the blow that would haunt me forever. He turned eyes hard, voice deliberate. "The best gift you could give me tonight is to finally disappear." The room spun. The candles flickered low wax, dripping like tears. And there, in a mansion built on my sacrifice, my son handed me the cruelest gift of all, the death of every illusion I had ever held about his love. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His words echoed in the marble walls, cruel and final, like a verdict delivered in a courtroom where I had no defense. The laughter from other rooms of the mansion grew faint, muffled under the weight of my son's command. My legs trembled as though I were standing on broken glass. I had walked in with a cake. I was leaving with a coffin for every illusion I had ever held. The grand chandelier above seemed to mock me, scattering golden light across velvet chairs and polished floors, a palace built on my sacrifices. Yet in that instant, the room felt colder than any hospital ward I had ever worked in at 3 a.m. I, Rosa Alvarez, once a nurse who held strangers' hands as they clung to life, was now dismissed by the very life I had brought into this world. I glanced toward the corner of the room and saw him, Eduardo. He was an old friend, a retired doctor who had once shared night shifts with me decades ago. He had been invited tonight perhaps out of politeness, perhaps out of guilt. His eyes widened, his hand frozen mid-air with a glass of wine. He had heard every word. Our gazes met, and in his eyes I saw pity, shock, and the silent question, "How could your own child say that?" But Eduardo said nothing. None of them did. The air was too heavy, too fragile, as if even a whisper would shatter what was left of my dignity. Sophia smirked behind her glass, her painted lips curling in satisfaction, as though Daniel's cruelty had been the performance she'd been waiting for all evening. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my fists against that polished table and shout every sleepless night, every double shift, every dollar scraped together for Daniel's future. But no words came. Only silence. Silence that burned hotter than fire. I tried to steady my breathing. My hands reached for the cake as if holding it would anchor me to the floor. The candles had nearly melted red wax dripping onto the white frosting like blood on snow. 46 years of devotion reduced to an unwanted cake and a sentence that expelled me from my own family. Daniel didn't even flinch. He sipped his wine. His shoulders relaxed as if he had just told me to close a window or move a chair. For him, it was nothing. For me, it was everything. Eduardo finally set his glass down. His lips parted as if to speak, but he stopped himself. Perhaps he thought it wasn't his place. Perhaps he feared Danielle's wrath. So he looked away, choosing silence over solidarity. That too cut deep. In that gilded room, I realized I was utterly alone. The home I had financed, the family I had held together, the life I had built brick by brick, it had become a stage where I was no longer welcome. My son had spoken his wish, and the cruel truth was undeniable. I was no longer a mother. In his eyes, only an obstacle. And in that frozen silence, something inside me began to shift. That night, after leaving Daniel's house with the uneaten cake still trembling in my hands, I walked into my tiny apartment and collapsed onto the worn sofa. The silence there was kinder than the silence in that mansion. In the dark, memories began to surge one after another like a dam breaking. 46 years of my life, every sacrifice, every choice poured out before me, demanding to be remembered. I saw myself at 25 standing in the fluorescent light of the hospital, clutching Daniel's small body as fever ravaged him. Pneumonia, the doctor had said. He needed antibiotics we couldn't afford. I had no savings left, so I sold the gold earrings my mother had given me, the last heirloom of her life. I remember the weight of that jewelry box as I handed it over to the pawnbroker. It's just metal, I told myself. His life is worth everything. Years later, Daniel wanted to attend medical school. I worked triple shifts, 12, sometimes 16 hours, changing bandages, holding dying hands, listening to heart monitors, beep in endless rhythm. I told myself each long night was an investment. One day, he'll be doctor. Alvarez whispered proudly to my coworkers, but he dropped out saying it wasn't for him. He wanted to be in business. I swallowed my disappointment and paid for the new dream without protest. When his business collapsed under debt, I was there too. I took out a loan in my own name to keep him from declaring bankruptcy. My hands shook as I signed the papers, but Daniel had cried into my shoulder that night, promising he'd make me proud. I believed him. Then came his wedding. Sophia wanted the grandest ballroom in the city, a dress that sparkled like diamonds, flowers imported from Italy. It cost more than I had ever imagined spending, but I told myself every mother wants her son's wedding to be magical. I drained half of my savings, wrote check after check, and smiled as though it didn't tear at my future. And the house, the very mansion where he now wished me gone. I handed him $150 to $1,000, nearly everything I had saved for retirement. I told him it was my gift, a foundation for his family. He hugged me, then whispered, "You're the best mother in the world." I clung to those words, not knowing they would become empty echoes. When the twins were born, I became the free babysitter day and night. Sophia said she needed her freedom, and Daniel said he was too busy. I rocked those babies until my arms ached, whispered lullabies into their ears, loved them as fiercely as I had once loved him. And yet, beneath all those sacrifices lay the deepest one of all. Long ago, I had a chance to leave. A man named Lorenzo, my one true love, had asked me to move with him to Italy to start a small cafe together. He wrote letters filled with dreams of cobblestone streets and mornings by the sea. But I stayed. I stayed because Daniel was my world, my responsibility, my promise. I folded those letters into a box and tucked away my own happiness. And now, my son wanted me to vanish. He had taken everything, my money, my years, my heart, and in return, he gave me exile. In that dark apartment with tears streaking my face, I realized a bitter truth. I had sacrificed my life for a child who would rather I was dead. The tears would not stop that night. They soaked the sleeves of my blouse until the fabric clung to my arms. I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, the cake box still unopened on the counter as though mocking me. My mind spun with every sacrifice, every dollar, every choice I had made for Daniel. And suddenly, a thought pierced through the fog. How much had I given? I rose my legs unsteady and walked to the old cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside were the boxes I had kept for decades, shoe boxes filled with receipts, invoices, bank slips, contracts. Some women collect jewelry or keepsakes. I had collected proof that my life had been spent on him. I opened the first box and there it was, the receipt for the antibiotics. When Daniel was 3, $1 and $200, I did not have scraped together by selling my mother's earrings. My hands shook as I traced the faded ink. Another slip, 4 years of tuition payments, $42,000 for the medical degree he never finished. Then the bankruptcy papers showing the $18,000 loan I had taken in my name to keep his failed business afloat. Page after page, box after box, the numbers piled higher. The ballroom invoice for his wedding, $35,000. The wire transfer for the down payment on the mansion, $150,000. 8 months of mortgage payments when he was unemployed, $16,000. Orthodontist bills for the twins, $4,000. Gifts, vacations, countless emergencies, at least another $10,000. I sat back, the papers spread around me like the ruins of my life. I did the math once, then again, because I could hardly believe it. Nearly $500,000, $460,000 to be exact. Money that could have secured a peaceful retirement, money that could have been invested, grown doubled, money that could have been used to travel to rest, to live. Instead, it had all vanished into the black hole of a son who now wished me gone. As I stared at the numbers, a sob rose in my throat, but when it escaped, it sounded more like a laugh, bitter, hollow, jagged. How foolish I had been, I thought. I believed love could be measured by sacrifice, and that my endless giving would one day be repaid with care. But the balance sheet told the truth. I was bankrupt, not in dollars, but in dignity. It was then that I noticed something at the bottom of the trunk, a yellowed envelope sealed, but brittle with age. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter from Lorenzo. His handwriting slanted and passionate leapt off the page. Rosa, come with me to Florence. We will open a cafe by the piazza. We will drink coffee each morning by the sea. Choose freedom. Choose us. The ink blurred as my tears fell onto the paper. I had chosen Daniel instead. I had chosen duty sacrifice chains disguised as love. And now, decades later, all I held was a broken body, an empty bank account, and the echo of a man who once offered me a life of joy. That night, clutching Lorenzo's letter in one hand and Daniel's receipts in the other, I understood the cruelest truth. I had given away my love, my youth, my fortune, even my freedom, and in return my son gave me nothing but contempt. And for the first time in my life, the thought crossed my mind like a spark. What if I stopped giving? The letter from Lorenzo still trembled in my hands when a strange calm washed over me. For decades, I had lived chained to duty, shackled by the belief that sacrifice equaled love. But staring at those receipts, at that letter from a man who once promised me freedom, a spark ignited inside me. What if I stopped giving? What if I chose myself even once? The next morning, I put on my best navy blue dress, the one I used to wear on Easter Sundays, and walked into the bank where the tellers had known me for years. "Good morning, Mrs. Alvarez," the manager greeted me kindly. He had no idea that I was about to close the chapter of my life as the perpetual rescuer. "I want to close the joint account ending in 2731, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. His eyebrows lifted. "That account is linked to your son's mortgage fund." "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied, signing the papers with a hand that no longer trembled. "Transfer the full balance to my personal account." When the screen showed the numbers, $20, $1,000 sliding back into my name, a jolt of satisfaction coursed through me. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but liberation. For the first time in years, I was reclaiming what was mine. From the bank, I went straight to the office of Clara Morales, my closest friend from my nursing days. Clara had always been the fierce one, the nurse who stood up to arrogant surgeons, the one who reminded me that life was more than just duty. Her hair was silver now, her glasses perched low on her nose, but her eyes still blazed with the same fire. "Rosa," she said as I entered, "I haven't seen you in months." "What brings you here, Clara?" I whispered, sliding Lorenzo's letter across her desk. "I'm done. I want to change everything, my will, my insurance, the house papers. Daniel can't inherit a single penny." Clara leaned back, studying me with quiet awe. "Are you sure I've never been more certain?" I said, my voice low but fierce. "I want my savings to go to the Orphans Foundation. And I want a trust fund for the twins, but not until they're 25. I won't let Sophia touch a dime." Clara smiled almost proudly. "Then let's get to work." For 2 hours, we combed through every document, every signature. By the time I left, the chains around my neck felt lighter. But one more piece remained. If Daniel wanted me to disappear, then I would give him exactly that, but on my terms. That evening, I knocked on the door of my neighbor Isabella, a 25-year-old aspiring actress who often practiced her monologues in the hallway. "Isabella," I said softly, "I need your help with a performance, the most important one of my life." Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "A performance?" "Yes," I replied. "I want to stage my own disappearance." For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not as a mother, not as a nurse, not as a servant to someone else's needs, but as Rosa Alvarez, a woman finally ready to write her own ending. The plan came together faster than I imagined. Isabella rehearsed her role with the precision of a stage actress, while Clara tied up the legal ends like the seasoned fighter she was. And then one quiet Thursday evening, I packed my life into 2 modest suitcases. The walls of my apartment stood bare, stripped of photographs, stripped of the story I had once believed was my only purpose. I left the lights off as I closed the door for the last time. On the kitchen table, beneath the soft glow of a single lamp, I placed the letter. 23 pages of truth. Line after line, sacrifice after sacrifice, every bill, every sleepless night, every piece of myself I had given away. I wrote not in bitterness, but in clarity, like a nurse recording a patient's final chart. Facts that could no longer be denied. "Daniel," the letter began, "you once asked for the greatest gift I could give you, my disappearance. Tonight I grant you that wish. But know this, you have not lost a nuisance. You have lost the woman who carried you through pneumonia with bloodied hands, who bought your future with her bones, who gave you love that should have lasted a lifetime. Read these pages carefully. They are the record of your mother's life, a ledger of everything you took for granted. When I finished, I signed my name, folded it neatly, and laid Lorenzo's old letter on top as if to remind myself of the life I had forfeited. Then I turned the key and stepped into the night. By morning, the storm had begun. Sophia was the first to arrive at my apartment. She expected to find me waiting, desperate, as always, to serve. Instead, she pushed open the door to silence and emptiness. The closet's bare, the bed stripped. Only the letter remained resting like a verdict on the kitchen table. Her scream carried down the hallway. Neighbors whispered as she stumbled outside, clutching the pages with trembling hands. Daniel's panic came soon after. He called my phone 37 times in one night. Each time, the call rang out into nothingness. His messages grew frantic, then angry, then pleading. "Mom, answer me. Mom, where are you? This isn't funny. We need you. The kids need you. Please just pick up. Please." But there was no answer. Not from me. Not anymore. And then came the twist that none of them expected. My grandson, Mateo, 15 years old, found the letter Sophia tried to hide. He read every page in secret, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor, his hands shaking as he realized the truth. The money, the sacrifices, the relentless giving, none of it had been a myth. His grandmother had been their lifeline, and they had crushed her. Later, Clara told me that when Mateo finished the letter, he pressed it to his chest and wept. For the first time, someone in that house finally saw me, not as a burden, not as an endless supply of money and service, but as a woman who had bled herself dry out of love. In that moment, my disappearance was no longer just Daniel's nightmare. It was his reckoning. And for me, it was the first night I slept in peace. In the weeks after my disappearance, the cracks in Daniel's perfect world began to spread like fractures in glass. Without my quiet deposits, the joint account dried up in less than a month. Bills piled on his mahogany desk, red stamps bleeding across envelopes like wounds. The mortgage company called daily, and then came the letter the bank was beginning foreclosure proceedings. I imagine him pacing that grand living room, the chandeliers glittering above him like cruel spectators, while Sophia packed her designer clothes into expensive suitcases. She didn't even bother to hide her disdain. "Daniel," she spat, "I didn't marry you to live like a beggar. I deserve better. I'll find someone who can give me the life I want." And just like that, she walked out, her heels clicking across the marble floor as though stamping the end of their marriage. For the first time in their pampered lives, my grandchildren tasted absence, not mine, but the absence of comfort. Mateo told Clara later how the refrigerator stood nearly empty, how lights were turned off to save on electricity, how his father sat silent at the dinner table staring at a plate of beans as though it were poison. The boy's voice cracked when he said Grandma would never have let this happen. And then came Eduardo, my old friend, the man who had once seen me cradle Daniel through nights of fever, who had stood beside me when I worked myself raw as a nurse. He visited Daniel one evening after hearing whispers of their collapse. Eduardo was not a man to mince words. He looked my son straight in the eye and said, "You've done it, Daniel. You've killed the very heart that kept you alive for 46 years. Your mother bled herself dry for you, and instead of gratitude, you spat on her soul." Daniel tried to protest, his voice cracking, but Eduardo raised a trembling finger. "Do not lie to me. I saw it with my own eyes at your birthday when you told her to vanish. You don't realize yet, but you'll carry that sentence until the day you die." Those words struck like a gavel, final and damning. I wasn't there, but Clara told me Daniel's face collapsed, his arrogance stripped away. For the first time in his life, my son sat in silence, confronted not by his mother's endless forgiveness, but by another man's truth. Meanwhile, the mansion, the one I had emptied my savings to give them, was stripped of its glory. Furniture, sold cars, repossessed rooms echoing with loss. The house became a hollow shell, much like Daniel himself. And me, I walked through a new city suitcase in hand, breathing air that was finally my own. For the first time in decades, the chains had fallen, and I felt the ground beneath me, steady, real mine. The family I left behind was crumbling, yes, but for the first time I understood their collapse was not my tragedy. It was their reckoning. I had watched their world crumble from afar, and for once I did not feel the urge to rush back and rescue. That chapter was closed. What awaited me was something entirely new, something I had denied myself for decades. With Clara's help and the money I had saved from Daniel's grip, I boarded a plane to Florence, the very city Lorenzo had once written about in letters now yellowed with time. When I stepped onto the cobblestone streets, the scent of espresso and baked bread carried me back 40 years. My heart pounded as though I were a young woman again, clutching dreams instead of receipts. And there he was, Lorenzo older now, his hair silver, his hands lined, but his eyes the same warm, mischievous eyes that once promised me freedom. "Rosa," he whispered, as though speaking my name might shatter the fragile miracle. I smiled through tears. "I'm late, Lorenzo. 46 years late, but I'm here." He took my hands, trembling with both age and relief. "You came back to me." Together, we opened a little cafe near the piazza. Not grand, not luxurious, but filled with laughter, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine and the chatter of travelers from every corner of the world. I worked the mornings greeting tourists with cappuccinos and stories of Florence. Lorenzo handled the books, though sometimes he'd sneak away to charm guests with tales of his youth. For the first time in my life, I was not exhausted by duty, I was nourished by joy. But my rebirth was not just about love. I joined a group of women at the church who dedicated themselves to helping abandoned children. We sewed clothes, cooked meals, and raised funds. In their eyes, I saw reflections of myself, women who had given everything only to be forgotten. I began to write my memoir, spilling onto the pages, A Mother's Disappearance. I called it not as tragedy, but as liberation. To my surprise, other women leaned in, listening, nodding, weeping. My story was no longer just mine. It became a mirror in which they saw their own lives. One afternoon, as I wiped down cafe tables, a letter arrived. The handwriting was young but determined. It was from Mateo. "Grandma," it began, "I found your letter. I read every word. I understand now. I promise you I will not be like Dad. I will remember your sacrifices and honor them. I will be different. I love you." I pressed the paper to my heart, tears falling onto the ink. There in his words was the flicker of something I thought I had lost forever: hope. Perhaps Daniel was beyond saving, but Mateo, he could carry the light forward. As the sun set over Florence painting the sky gold, I stood in the doorway of our cafe. Lorenzo's laughter drifted from inside the bells of the Duomo rang in the distance, and in that moment, I knew I had been reborn. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's sacrifice, but as Rosa Alvarez, a woman finally free. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your feelings in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. It always amazes me how these stories connect us across oceans and generations. Don't forget to subscribe to Everyday Family Conflicts for more powerful life stories. Your voice matters here, so join the conversation below.